When did your instincts scream, "Leave now"? And what did you later find out you avoided? Story 1. Okay, a little less dark than most comments here, but I thought I'd share. I went to the zoo with some friends and my girlfriend. There was this huge bird cage, I forgot the word, where you could walk in and see all the little colorful birds. Story 2. I offered him a drink and got one myself as well. I thought he seemed odd, so I was texting my friends to hurry up. But then my sweet, timid, but large dog started barking and growling at this man like I'd never heard before or since. I told the guy to get TF out, and when he got irritated, I said, if the dog says you're out, you get out. He tried to argue and I had to shout him out. 10 minutes later, I hit the floor and crawled to the bathroom to puke. I slept for ages. I never puke when I drink, and I never get that tipsy. I thought I'd had my drink in my sight the whole night, but I can only assume he slipped me something. My dog was 4 at the time and is now 11. I'm so glad I listened because his instincts definitely saved me from something awful. Answer. I have a similar story. I was at the bar with an old friend for a beer or two. After one beer, I had this feeling that I had to get out of there now. Ended up blacking out while driving halfway home, and somehow ended up waking up the next morning in my bed with a terrible hangover. Come to find out later that one of the bartenders got caught putting things in girls' drinks. Story 3. I was taking the southbound red in Chicago during wintertime a few years ago, and 3 people wearing balaclavas entered my car, which was already pretty full. 2 were standing in front of one exit, and the other guy was standing in front of the other. I saw them scan the people in the car in my peripheral vision. Then the guy standing alone looked over at the other 2 and gave them an okay nod. I felt like something was about to go down, so I got off at the next stop and walked the rest of the way home. Fortunately, was not stopped by one of those guys when I passed them, probably because other people were in the car. About 10 minutes later, I got a ping from the Citizen app saying something along the lines of robbery shooting at next station. I passed the next station on the walk back and saw tons of cop cars, along with an ambulance parked at the entrance. Story 4. My mom had something like this. It was back in 2003 when I was 12, my sister 10. Mom and Dad were planning on a date night, and they were going to have us kids go stay with our grandma and great-grandma for the night. Mom said she changed her mind last minute, and instead they rescheduled and we all stayed home. My grandma's house burned down that night, eliminate my great-grandma, and severely injuring grandma and one of my uncles. Had my sister and I been there, we would have likely been in the same room with great-grandma or grandma, and one of both of us would have died. Answer. Oh man, that is so awful about your family members. My aunt has a really similar story. She was supposed to go to a slumber party when she was little, but decided last minute she didn't want to go. The house burned down, and the 2 twin girls she'd be going to stay with died. Story 5. I was in after party purely BC my friend wanted to bang one of the dudes. I waited in the living room. First full of people, but dwindling down to eventually just 2 guys, me. Friend has yet to emerge from random hookups bedroom. Answer. I was high, tipsy, and on LSD and at a party. I'm a small woman. I had been hanging out with a bunch of girls when I got a bad feeling. I see this dude staring at me. I knew him from class and he kept cornering me and trying to convince me to go home with him to sleep it off. My gut feeling told me that if I get in the car with him, I'm not making it out unmolested. I was pretty fudge up, but not obliterated to the point I would get into a car with a stranger. When I refused, he got super obvious about his intentions. He got the guy throwing the party to kick me out, so I would have no choice but to go with him. He looked incredibly smug as he walked to his car to open the door for me to get in. I ran past him and jumped in my car and locked the doors and drove off. I ended up driving my car while high 3 streets over and parking behind an empty church to sleep it off. I have never met a more entitled individual in my entire life, and to this day, I wonder why he thought that would work. He got arrested for dealing coke and heroin. Story 6. I was at a party and this guy pushed me up against a wall. He swore it was a joke, but I said, nah, I'm out. I'd already had bad vibes off him all night and called my boyfriend. All my friends were at the party and didn't want to leave, and asked him to pick me up because I was tipsy. A week later, that guy was arrested for violation. Answer. There's a really good book on personal protection that I gave all the young females in my family. It's called Gift of Fear by Gavin DeBecker. He owns one of the largest security companies in the world, provides security over half of Hollywood and other high-profile people. In it, he talks about trusting your instincts. You're trusted yours and it save you. Phenomenal read. Story 7. I was in my science class, writing notes and watching an experiment we were doing. I got a feeling I should move over to a different part of the table, so I did. Story 8. One night I was waiting for the train when 4 guys walked up and I immediately got a bad vibe from them. I've been robbed once before on the train, and their demeanor reminded me of the guys who robbed Melink. They were sizing me up and they were excited about it. I stood there for a couple more minutes reading my book and trying to look casual, then walked probably 3 or 4 car lengths down the platform. They stayed where they were but kept looking at me. When the train pulled up, I went to get in the front door of the car, glanced behind me, and saw them running down the platform toward me. I got in the car and made my way to the back doors at the opposite end. A few seconds later, the 4 guys burst through the front doors and started looking around. I slipped out the back doors right as they were closing, before the guys spotted me, so I ended up safe on the platform while they were stuck on the train as it pulled away. When they looked out the window and saw me, they looked furious. I booked it out of the station and took the bus instead. The next day there was a news story that someone was robbed at knife point at the next stop right around that time, by 4 men who fit the description of the men I encountered. I'm so glad I listened to my gut and got out of that situation. In hindsight, it all happened so fast and it's crazy that I reacted in exactly the right way to get myself to safety. Answer: goddamn. I learned a long time ago that when your subconscious takes over, that fudge is smarter and faster than you could ever be. So lean into whatever it's doing, if you even have the chance to. If you end up back in control of your actions, it's still going to be screaming in your brain what your next move should be if you aren't in a safe position yet. Our survival instincts are crazy, and while it's usually extremely traumatic, getting to know that part of yourself is a fascinating experience because of how precise your decisions and actions are. Story 9. Years ago, I was hanging out with a couple friends in the street. We had the idea to go to a certain club during the night. When we finally decided to start walking towards it, I got a strange gut feeling about it that I couldn't really understand or shake off. I told my friends that I wasn't feeling like clubbing that night, but that they could go without me. My friends tried to convince me to go for a bit, but I refused. They gave up and said that we could rather hang out at a friend's house. Story 10. Not me, but my husband. He used to work for a delivery company. He had an unshakable feeling one morning to a point that he couldn't bring himself to go into work. He just kept saying something was off, and he was going to trust his gut. The guy who covered his shift delivered to a house where he got attacked by 2 dogs, and dispatch didn't pick up on the fact that his vehicle hadn't moved until 6 hours later. No one knew he was there, and by the time anyone came out to check on the guy, he was too far gone to be able to save. I still think about that. I feel so incredibly bad for the guy and his family. At the same time, I'm beyond grateful my husband didn't go to work that day. It's a double-edged sword thinking about it from a moral standpoint. My husband quit that company the next day after they sent out a reminder email to the drivers about what happened. And it very heartlessly was, "Woof woof, remember to be mindful about our furry customers. They don't always know that we're bringing them good things." I wish I was joking. What an odd set of events. I hope the other guy's family is doing okay. I hope you all gave each other a big hug after that one. Story 11. Not really leave now, but when I was in my final year of high school, I planned to return my books to the library near my school a couple of towns further on Saturday. I told some friends about it, so maybe we could hang out after. The morning of, I really didn't want to go and didn't want to come out of bed, so decided to just go later. At that time, I was an early riser, and this was something I would normally almost never do. Also, I love going to the library. An hour later, some friends kept trying to call me, and one was even at my door. Apparently, the train I was supposed to take had derailed, and several people had died. Answer. Similar story. My dad was a kid, traveling with the family on vacation. His dad gave in to everyone else that wanted to sleep in and rescheduled to a later flight to Cuba. The earlier flight suffered a mid-air collision. My grandfather was a neurosurgeon, and his assistant did not know about the flight change but did have the vacation itinerary. She was made aware of the crash. I can't verify this part of the story, and apparently the school my dad and attended made an announcement that they had died. Edit, typo. Story 12. I went to sleep for an extra shift I picked up earlier than normal. One of my really good friends really pushed for me to go with him to a party. I couldn't bring myself to have fun instead of getting sleep before a 12-hour shift. Turns out, he was planning to take down tragic Endus. He wrecked his car into a tree right after leaving the party as his way out of this world. He survived, and his dad found notebooks and poems about how he had planned all this out. And this was his way of us living in the afterlife as bros. We stopped talking after. Story 13. Not me, but my then roommate was a school janitor. He usually left for work before I got up, and I was surprised to see him out in the living room playing Xbox when I knew he had to work that day. Apparently, he just had a terrible feeling that something was going to happen that day and called in sick. I thought he was being an idiot, but when the news hit later that day that there had been a school shooting with multiple casualties, I was stunned. I don't think science has any kind of explanation for that. It's one thing if he was regularly slacking off and something happened on an off day, but I'd never seen him just up and miss work for any reason, never mind just having a bad feeling. Story 14. Not a leave now moment, but something similar. I was living in my parents' apartment and they were both asleep. Both take medication to sleep, so they were out. I was about to go to sleep as well, so I turned my light off, but something told me to open my door, so I did. And I looked out into the hallway and saw flickering lights on the wall. I thought, that's weird, and almost ignored it, but instead, I decided to check it out. Turns out my mom put a candle in a plastic cup on top of an antique dresser. Of course, it started a fire. The flames were about 2 feet high, and the living room was filled with smoke already. Luckily, I was able to put it out and wake my parents to air out the apartment. I think to myself sometimes that if I decided to just go to sleep, me and my parents both would have probably died to a house fire. Always trust your gut. Story 15. When I had just turned 7, my family and I were visiting extended family in Scotland. It was 1982 and we traveled from NZ. It was normal then for children to be pretty free range. I had gone down the road by myself to the local shops, and I was followed on the way back by a man. He gave off the most malevolent and evil feeling despite doing nothing but walk behind me. I always remembered that so strongly. I ran down the alley behind my aunt and uncle's house to hide because I didn't want to get caught at the front door where I might have to wait for someone to open the door. Years later, I saw an image of a man on an online news site. I think it was around 2010. I recognized that man. It was Peter Tobin, Scottish serial killer and intimacy offender. He was familiar with the area of Glasgow we'd been staying and has been tied to a pedophile ring. Answer: he gave off the most malevolent and evil feeling despite doing nothing but walk behind me. I've experienced this, thankfully only one time in my life. Got on a bus. It was standard busy but not packed, and I noticed this man sitting in the middle of the bench seat right at the back. And like an immense wave, that feeling of malevolent evil washed over me. Just got right off at the next stop and waited for the next bus. No idea who he was, etc. But I've never been in the presence of that feeling before or since, so there was something very real about it. Story 16. I used to be an altar server for the church the foster family I was with at the time attended. Catholic, real strict, small rural ranching town. The priest that had been there basically forever passed away. He was well into his 90s, and they went through a few temporary ones before they got one that would stick around longer. He was younger and seemed really interested in the youth of the church, trying to set up youth groups and stuff like that. He got really interested in foster kids or those living in group homes and whatnot in particular. And since mine was heavily involved with the church, part of how I got roped into being a server, and I was there a lot, he took a lot of notice of me. He kept trying to get me to have private Bible rap sessions with him, whatever that meant, and said he wanted to give me more personal guidance, saying I'd need it since I didn't have the support of a biological family and all that, something he apparently said to other kids in similar situations. By that time, I'd honed pretty good instincts for people who were off, and this guy sent all my alarm bells ringing. I tried to be polite when in front of anyone else, but I made it absolutely clear to my foster parents of the time that I would absolutely not tolerate being anywhere near him any more than necessary, and there was no way in hell I was going to be alone with him, and I would get violent if I needed to. They knew I meant it, too, from previous incidents, so they never tried to force it. Found out many years later, after I was an adult, from a furry comedian talk show, to the Ranting Griffin, of all places, that the priest who had skeeved me out so much had been arrested for the intimacy assault at gunpoint of a little boy, and actually trying to hire someone to eliminate that child after the kid had told people what happened to him. Apparently, the guy he tried to hire to do the job said he couldn't do it, but knew someone who could, and he contacted the FBI, who set up a sting with an agent, pretending to be someone who was available for hire. And when the priest tried to hire him, he got arrested. The church tried to cover it all up, of course, and I'm pretty sure the church is still there and pretends nothing happened. I don't know what his final sentence was, but whatever it was, I hope he's been torn apart and can never harm anyone ever again. I just wish he'd never gotten the chance to hurt any kid, and knowing that it wasn't me doesn't really bring me any feeling of relief, because I know I would have made an entire Broadway musical out of it, whether people believe me or not, and at the very least, that might have spared other kids' experiences cases I'd already dealt with anyway. Maybe I would have even had a chance to go for his throat, who knows? But apparently my instincts that he was bad news, no matter how friendly and with it he acted, were spot on. Answer: same with our local police officer when I was a kid. Small Welsh town with its own resident Bobby, loved by all. He'd been in post about 2 years, just walking around, a local character like the milkman and postman. I grew up in the 80s, it was like that. He began dressing as Father Christmas for the festive fair. We all knew it was him inside the costume, but he was so nice. The magic wasn't spoiled, and we just overlooked it. I remember him lifting me onto his knee and asking me what I wanted. Castle Grayskull from He-Man. He laughed and told me it was a strange gift for a little girl, but he'd see what he could do. My mom took a photo, which I still have. He then held my arm and whispered to me, "Is your lovely brother not coming today?" He was poorly at home. A chill shot up my spine. Every cell in my body screamed at me to get away from him and get to my brother. I told my dad what he'd said and how I felt, trembling, and my dad's reassured me that he was just being nice. He took me home and I got into bed with my brother and wouldn't leave him. We stayed away from my Charmin after that. About a year later, a friend of ours turned up on our back step crying. We were a refuge for troubled kids. They knew my dad would take care of them. Cup of tea and a hug. Lots of poverty and neglect in town. Dad talked to him for a bit, then got up, got his coat and said he was taking Chrissy to the hospital as he'd had an accident and didn't know when he'd be back. My older sister looked after us while he was gone. Hours passed. When he got back, Chrissy was being kept in overnight. Dad was red-faced, and he was hiding his hands. A police car turned up a little while later, talked my dad, then left. We never saw Mr. Charmin again. When I was a bit older, I found out that Charmin had been abusing a lot of boys from town. Small things at first, hugging and making them sit on his knee. Then it started escalating, and he used his status to threaten the kids they'd be arrested and executed if they told anyone. The night Chrissy turned up, he'd rap-head him and Dad took him to hospital as he was bleeding and could barely walk. The hospital called the police. Dad went to Charmin's house and knocked him about until they turned up. Charmin was arrested and we never saw him again. Chrissy never really recovered psychologically. He's in his 50s now and an alcoholic. It tore apart our town. I'm so scared of policemen and it's never left me. The photo is chilling even without context. Evil lurks in so many hearts. Story 17. When I was 13, my aunt took me to the beach. It was a little later in the day and pretty empty, just me and her. Not too far out, I found a sandbar. The water went from knee-deep to suddenly not being able to touch the ground. But I went out further and found a second sandbar where I could touch the ground again. I kept diving under the water to try to feel around for sand dollars, but I noticed a faint buzzing that started getting louder and louder and louder. There were no boats or anything, and I could only hear it when my head was under the water. But it sounded like something big was next to me and super close. It was starting to weird me out, so I looked back at my aunt, who was standing next to 2 other people, frantically waving at me and screaming, but I couldn't hear what they were saying. I just knew right then and there, don't splash, don't panic, and move slow. I basically tried to keep the pace of just walking back, even when my feet couldn't touch the ground. The buzzing I was hearing turned out to be sharks circling me. 2 joggers noticed the fins and told my aunt they weren't dolphins and that they were getting closer to me. My aunt was pissed I took so long getting out, but I told her I felt like it would have been an awful idea to start kicking and splashing, and something was telling me to go as slow as possible. Answer: that's terrifying. Even if sharks don't really attack often, you don't want to tempt fate. One time my family was in Galveston, at the beach a little before sunset, which is the prettiest time, but also, I think, the time with the most shark activity, with my brother and I playing in the shallow water. My dad was watching us from the shore when he saw a particularly tall wave about 30 feet behind us. He watched the wave as it rose up and blocked the setting sun from his view, and there silhouetted in the tall wave was a massive hammerhead. Right as the wave was falling again, he saw it turn towards the shore where my brother and I were. He couldn't even explain what he saw. He was so panicked that he just squealed like a pig and ran into the water and dragged us out. Story 18. At first, I thought I was being weird, overly sensitive. I stopped by this local small grocery store because I needed some milk and mayonnaise, but didn't want to go to my regular store that was much busier and further from my house. This guy kept appearing at the end of the aisle I was in. To say he looked at me in a creepy way would be a bigger understatement than saying the surface of the sun is kind of warm. After 3 times of these looks, I checked out and left. I saw him in the parking lot. He just stood there watching me get in my car. Unfortunately, I didn't learn my lesson so quickly. I went to that store 2 more times when I needed just an item or two. That man was there each time. I was so creeped out by this guy, I stopped going to that store. I thought I was being crazy, but I tell you, the look in that guy's eyes was so scary, like he was devouring me with his eyes or something. Didn't think about that guy until almost a year later when I saw him on the TV. He had just been arrested. Turns out his name was Gary Ridgway. He worked on the street I lived on, about 5 blocks down. Gary Ridgway was the Green River Killer. Answer: same thing happened to me, but I had a basket full of groceries. Every section I was in, a man kept appearing. No basket, nothing in his hands. It unsettled me. I get to the last of my shopping in the produce section. There he is again. I get what I need, head to the checkout. Look over. He's in self-checkout with a banana, taking his time. I asked the clerk checking me out if I could get a security guard to walk me out. I felt uncomfortable. Security walks me outside and helps me load up. The man walks out and just stares. The whole drive home I'm checking my mirrors, going a different less traveled route just to make sure I wasn't being followed. Really scared me. So yes, always be aware and trust your gut, ladies. Story 19. I was close to the front at a music festival 25 years ago. Not only was it my first big music festival, I was there with my schoolmates and no adult presence with us. Story 20. This was honestly really obvious in hindsight, but I was acting naive and tipsy when I said, traveling alone, 26-year-old female, in Lisbon after dinner. On my walk to my hostel, a guy stopped me and said I looked really familiar, asking me where I was from, etc. I was in a great mood, so we get to chatting. I noticed another guy with his hood up in the background pacing back and forth, and I made eye contact with him. He quickly looked away but was lingering, and I realized, oh, I am about to get robbed. So I politely cut the conversation short and went on my merry way. Answer: random guys you don't know. Pretending they know you somehow is a major red flag. Common tactic used by a variety of people who will harm you. Sometimes they'll say you look familiar. Sometimes they'll ask if you've been to a common location, like a popular bar, saying they met or saw you there previously. Sometimes they'll guess a common name, hoping to get lucky. They're all using this as an in to either distract you or gain your trust. Story 21. Not leave now, but more in the sense of just knowing it's a disaster. My mom suffered from uncontrollably high blood pressure since I could remember. Last couple of years it got really bad, like 270 over 120 bad. Anyway, one night I woke up. I thought I heard a thud but wasn't sure. Everything was dark and silent, and I just turned around and tried to go back to sleep, but something didn't let me. I got a bad feeling and got up. Hallway was empty, and I went to the bathroom at the end of it. It was pitch dark. I turned the lights on in the bathroom and saw my mom on the floor. When passing comes knocking on your door, your gut knows. Answer: November 6, 1996 was the night my grandfather died of a heart attack. His wife went to pieces, and eventually, instead of calling 911, she called my mom. Mom screamed at her to call 911, and then we drove down there. 2-minute drive. Upon arriving, Mom discovered that Grandma still hadn't called 911. So Mom called and they arrived within 5 minutes. They were aggressive in their treatment all the way to the ER. It was hours later when we called it, as he had failed the apnea test multiple times. Mom blamed her mother for a while after that because her first instinct hadn't been to call 911. Story 22. Sitting in an otherwise empty living room at a house party after most of the other guests had left and everyone else is upstairs. 2 guys. One was the host whom I hadn't met before, and the other was his friend, and the older brother of one of my high school friends, who clearly didn't know who I was, came over and sat on either side of me, chatting and being friendly. The host is offering me plant substance. At the time, I was in a couple of bands, and so the host started telling me about his recording studio in the basement, offering to show it to me. I tell him, maybe later on, but he's very persistent, and so is his friend. I suddenly feel very uncomfortable with the whole encounter, tell them I need to use the washroom, and bolt upstairs to find my other friends, who coincidentally tell me they're ready to head out, so I go with them. The 2 guys see me as I'm heading out the door and ask, "Are you leaving?" And I just tell them, "Haha, yep, sorry," and take off, leaving them looking disappointed and confused. Answer: I found out from my ex that the host of this party is a known creep who preys on young women, offering them substances and inviting them to tour his studio, then assaulting and raping them after getting them alone. Super yikes on your ex to know and just IDK, be cool about it. And to only tell you after the fact, bro code is taking out the trash in your gender, not letting the trash continue to rot. Story 23. One of my friends was having issues with her roommate, who has unstable and nitpicky. I always thought she was just kind of loud and didn't do chores and was generally a bad roommate, but didn't expect much else. We were hanging, and her roommate came home and was just kind of silently smoldering. Usually she would be loud and nitpicky, but she just wasn't. She walked by the room where we were playing some games and just stared at us for a bit before walking away. I immediately felt super uneasy about it and told my friend that we should go out somewhere and give her space. She said she was too tired and was just going to take a nap. I told her that she should lock her door if she's going to do that, and she did, as I was leaving. I still can't believe I didn't push her harder to leave with me when I felt the vibe was off. She didn't deserve to die. Answer: holy shoot. I'm so sorry both you and your friend had to go through that. That is so tragic and heartbreaking. There's absolutely no way you could have known or predicted what would have happened. Your friend didn't die because of you. She died because her roommate was a monster, and she was a good and brave enough person to try to stop them. I'm so sorry for your loss. May she rest in peace now. Story 24. Reading all these comments makes me worried I'd never trust my instinct because I have anxiety. My anxiety incorrectly tells me there's danger everywhere, and I've learned to ignore it. Answer: I have bad anxiety and worry about this too, but I've heard from others that the feeling of a true warning from your intuition or senses or whatever is somehow different to the false alarms that our anxiety drums up. Supposedly, it's so strong and clear that, paradoxically, it's almost calming. Your gut knows something is wrong, and you know to listen to that instinct. I can only hope it really works this way. Story 25. Not me, but my dad. He was in Vietnam from 67-69, with a brief respite in Germany in between tours. There was one time when his company had completed a patrol, and they were waiting near their LZ pickup point for pickup the following morning. Despite not having enemy contact during the patrol, he ordered his entire company to move away from their LZ and reset perimeter, redig hasty fighting positions, etc., probably about 1,000 from their initial position. Their old position wound up getting mortar artillery fire throughout the night, and my dad is 100% convinced that if they would have stayed in their initial positions, that his whole company would have died. Story 26. Oof. I use this story as a warning to my kids as to why you always trust your gut. I, early 20s, was leaving the community college campus I was attending when I noticed a middle-aged, very plump woman walking up to me. She asked if I was leaving campus, to which I responded yes. She then went into a story of how she was at the hospital across the street and was released, but doesn't have money for a taxi, and asked if I would give her a ride. I quickly said yes. I felt bad for her. It was in the 90s and really hot that day. I have never given a stranger a ride before up until that point, but I didn't feel threatened or uncomfortable by her, and honestly thought I was just doing a good deed until we were walking to my car, and she started to ask me if I worked and if I was married. Whatever, small talk. Then we get to my car, and she notices one of my children's car seats. She asks me where my kids are. My body instantly tenses up for some reason, and it was weird, and I don't know why, but I responded that they were at daycare, and she asks who pays for daycare. My body at this point is tingling, and I ignore it. I tell her my partner at the time paid for it. We get into my car. Now, I had a small two-door hatchback, Hyundai Accent, and this woman struggled to get in. She was pretty plump, and this will be important later. She finally gets in, and we start driving. I ask her where she needs to go, and she gives me the street name. It's not far away, but it is in a pretty shoot area of town. I oblige and start that way. This whole time, my body is going off like alarm bells inside my head. I keep side-eyeing her, wondering if she is going to pull a knife out or something. Stupidly, I never thought about that before letting her in my car. She eliminates my overthinking by throwing me off when we are halfway there and asks, I don't have AC at home. Can I go to your house? I instantly say that I'm not heading to my house, that I have other things to do. So I sit there quietly the rest of the drive. Meanwhile, my body is experiencing what I assume is a confusion on fight, flight, or fawn, because I have no idea what the fudge to do right now. I pull onto her road, and she has me pull into an alley. I pull over, and she opens the passenger door and puts one foot out and acts like she is struggling to get out. She keeps looking ahead of us, though, which makes me look up. I see two men, dressed in dark clothes on this sweltering jerk day, and I freeze. I understood at that moment what was going on. She wasn't getting out of my car because these two men were on their way over to us. This meanie was not getting out of my car, and there was no way I could physically push this bigger woman out. At this point, my body takes over. Flight mode kicks in, and I just hit the gas. Story 27. Okay, this one fits the category but will be different from the rest. Many years ago, I was in New Orleans with friends, eating beignets at Café du Monde, and a TV film crew is there for a piece on the place and films us in a brief and funny interaction. The director was my age, cute, down to earth, and had a great sense of humor. So I was delighted when he invited me to meet up that night for a drink. I accepted, and we had a great time. I really liked him. No creepy vibes at all. He invited me back to his place in a way that felt comfortable and sweet, but I declined and went home even though I liked him, and we had a fun night, and I really did want to get to know him. It felt so random and weird to say no, but I just did, and felt like I should just go back to my hotel, which I was sharing with friends. So I did. I can't explain it at all, since I really did like him, but it was like the universe said, not tonight, and I was weirdly at peace with that despite it making no sense. Again, he was cool about it and drove me back to my hotel room without trying to make a move. Like I said, I didn't understand my actions, but also overwhelmingly felt this was right, so I drifted peacefully off to sleep and woke up an hour or two late with horrible food poisoning. Not the beignets, don't worry, which my two friends also had. Thus commenced a vile and horrible night of us three friends, puking and pooping our guts out for hours in a horrible brown round robin with one toilet between us. We three were and are like family and still laugh about it, but had I gone home with him, that poor guy would have been stuck taking care of me all night. Like it was so bad he couldn't have even taken me back to my place once it started, as I would have befouled his car. I didn't feel sick at all when I said no to him, and all his vibes were genuinely great, and I truly liked him. It really felt random, but also super clear that I should say no. And I gotta say this instinct saved him, not just me, from a horror show he did not deserve. I am sure that he wondered what he did wrong. Nothing. But has no idea of how lucky he was that I followed my gut. Before I had any physical clues that my gut was about to physically exit my body. Edit. Grammar. Answer. Haha, I've got a similar shoot story. I lived in Thailand at the time, and I'd been there about a month. I had a group of awesome friends I'd met, and we were out people watching. I had maybe a half pint of Guinness and started feeling off, thinking it was because I'd just spent the whole day training, so I told them I was going to bounce. I barely made it to my apartment before it was coming out both ends. The next 24 hours were a blur of bed and bathroom. Story 28. Back when I was still in high school, my mom told me to take a day off school because I would be going dress shopping with my uncle. He insisted and was pushy on buying me a bridesmaid dress because my sisters and I would be bridesmaids in his wedding the following day. So my sisters went to school, and my uncle picked me up from our house to go to JCPenney at the mall. At first, everything was fine. I quickly picked out my dress, and I figured he would just drop me off at home afterwards. He was super emotional, saying how excited he was to get married and everything. After we left the mall, he said he needed to go to my grandparents' house, and from there, we're going to pick up his friend from the airport, all while listing a bunch of other errands. At this point, I was feeling uncomfortable because this wasn't what I signed up for, and my gut was telling me I needed to get to my grandparents' house ASAP. I thought we would stop by my grandparents first, but he kept stopping at the most random places and met with the most random people, while I stayed in the car on high alert. He progressively smoked more plant substance and started driving more erratic, while going on whole tangents about whatever came to mind. By this point, I was tired and wanted out, so I kept assertively telling him we needed to go to grandparents' house and to drop me off there. We eventually did go there, and I immediately felt so much safer. He continued to drive and run around doing errands, and later on that night, my grandparents get a call. Police called to say he was at the mall near their house and had a mental break, started panicking, yelling and waving a knife around, scaring everyone around. Thankfully, he didn't harm himself or others around him. They did admit him into a nearby mental hospital. He had to reschedule his wedding out a couple of months, and his fiancée and everyone was concerned for him. All that said, I was very grateful I listened to my gut and glad I was assertive enough to get out of that situation that day. Story 29. My dad ignored his instincts and almost died. He was in high school and worked at my grandfather's store when he wasn't at school. It was a Saturday in dove season, and he had the day off to go hunting. But when he woke up that morning, he knew something bad was going to happen. He called everyone that was supposed to work that day and asked if they also felt like something was wrong and if they wanted him to take their shift. For some reason, he assumed that the bad thing was going to happen to someone else. Everyone told him he was being silly and to calm down and enjoy his day off. So he packed up his truck and grabbed his dog and headed off. On the drive to the hunting area, his dog broke out of the carrier in the back of his truck, double cab, and jumped into his lap while he was driving. He ended up going off the road at 75 miles per hour and hit a tree. His skull had multiple fractures, his nose was crushed up into his sinuses, and his left eye was popped out of the socket just hanging there. He also had multiple broken ribs. He somehow, I guess shock, managed to get himself out of the wreckage and dragged himself to a nearby house. Very lucky there was one anywhere near. It's a very, very rural area where he almost gave a nice old lady a heart attack. She tried to get him into the house, but she had white carpet, and my dad thought he was going to die anyway. So he refused to ruin her floor and passed out on her front porch. He then woke up in the hospital to a surgeon owling a sheet off his face and saying, "I can't do anything for him," before walking away. What the surgeon meant was, "I'm not a plastic surgeon, and he needs extensive facial reconstruction, so I can't do that." But what my dad thought is, God damn, this dude really just said, "I'm going to die." The next time he woke up was in a different hospital, where he was sent into surgery, and they mostly fixed his face. He's all good now, for the most part. He does have some scars and stuff, but nothing too crazy. Well, that's my opinion. I did have friends growing up that would refuse to come to my house because my dad's face scared them, but I really don't see what's so scary. Maybe because I grew up with him always looking like that, he just looks normal to me. He does look different than he's supposed to. I don't look much like his current face, but I do look very, very similar to the picture of him at 17 right before he almost died. Answer: my dad had a distinctive facial scar that he got when he was a little kid. I never noticed it. He was my dad and that's what he looked like. Apparently he was scary looking too. My boyfriend has a similar scar in the exact same place. He got it bouncing his face off a windshield when he was 17. It's not nearly as noticeable because plastic surgery improved over the 50 years in between. The faces of the people we love are perfect. Story 30. Was out to the clubs on Halloween night and it was around 1 a.m. My partner and our fam friends decided to head out. Before we did, we walked a little down the club street back. Lots of costumes to see, and the street had lots of different stores, tattoo shops, clubs, bars, restaurants open. My partner asked if we should walk the other way or just head out, and for some reason when I looked at the street I thought to myself, this would be a great place for a shooting. Big crowds and nowhere to run. And that random thought gave me chills. So I refused and made us go leave. They didn't really want to leave, but I told them I had a bad feeling. We got our Uber within 5 minutes, and as we were driving away, we passed several police cars with the lights, sirens on full blast, speeding to the strip of clubs. We ended up eating pizza, falling asleep around 4. When we woke up the next day, our phones were filled with missed texts and calls because it turns out we just missed a shooting. We had posted to our social media about being at the club where the shooting happened in front of the club we went to. We had left around 1:40 a.m. and the shooting happened about 1:47 a.m. Such a bizarre thought to have, but it ended up saving us. I remember several people were shot and I think 3 critically wounded. Then the shooter plus 1 other person was dead. We missed it by minutes. Insanity. Story 31. Was camping as a kid with my parents, younger brother, and other family friends. Sitting around the fire after breakfast, and my brother randomly stood up and walked around to sit on the other side of the fire without saying a word. Not 5 minutes later, a portion of a branch from a big overhead gum tree snapped off and drove into the ground exactly where he had been sitting. No doubt he would have died if he'd still been sitting there. We were all so rattled we immediately began packing up camp and heading home days early. Story 32. Finished up a workout at the gym with my then shoot and abusive boyfriend. I decided that day I would change the status quo. Instead of going to his truck and having our post-training meals and chatting, or fighting, I stopped at my car and told him that I was just going to go home. He asked a few times to talk first and I refused to go to his truck. We sat in my car and chatted for probably 3 minutes or so, and then we heard a loud screech and crash. We couldn't see what was going on, but we saw a bunch of people running towards where his truck was parked. An elderly lady pressed the accelerate instead of the brake accidentally and flew her vehicle through his truck and another car, decimating the rear left of the car and the right, middle to front of his truck. She also wedged the front left of his truck under the front right of the truck parked on the other side and managed to push all 3 up onto the walkway from curb height. The other truck smashed into a concrete planter in the lot. She was perfectly fine. 4 cars totaled. Where I would have been sitting, had I followed the regular status quo, was entirely crushed up to the engine. I would have died. Story 33. I was going to get on a bus to go hang out with friends when my gut told me something was wrong, so I came back home. The bus got into an accident and a bunch of people were injured in the crash. Story 34. My car broke down in my hometown whilst my folks were away. I posted to FB if anyone could help me with a lift. The first message I got was from a guy called George, a friend of a colleague of mine. At this time, I was 20. My work colleague was in his late 30s and an eccentric guy. 2 PhDs in chemistry, brewed his own moonshine, built his own armor, etc. Lots of people called him weird, but we got on perfectly well and happened to hang out at the same pub at the weekends. He introduced my friends and I to George one weekend at the pub and jokingly said, "And people think I'm weird. Just be nice to him. I think he's had a tough time." From the moment I laid eyes on George, I got more than weird vibes. We all know a socially awkward person who has obviously been bullied and teased their whole life. But I didn't feel that was around George. I didn't feel empathy. I felt scared. George proceeded to be a bit awkward and overstep conversations with people. They all kind of ignored it or just jested and moved on to the next topic. I tried to do some digging and brought it up to my colleague. I couldn't find him on Facebook, to which he replied, "Oh, he doesn't like to be looked up, but I'm sure he wouldn't mind sharing his profile with you. He likes you." George was under a completely random name, kind of hidden profile with few friends. I left it. He sent me a friend request a few days later. I accepted. Come to the day George offers me a lift. I politely decline and say someone else was coming to help. They weren't. He proceeds to offer to help with the car, any lifts I need in future ETD. Again, I just say thanks and I'll let him know. Fast forward a couple of weeks and my colleague is being off with me. I have no idea what happened. He's not talking to me. Our lunch outing stopped. I'm being blanked in the lab and he won't even make eye contact with me. I confronted him a few days later asking what's wrong. I was honestly worried I'd be tipsy at the pub and said something out of line. He then said we need to meet outside of work to talk about it. We popped to a pub at the weekend and he just sits there and starts with, "I'm so sorry. I'm so upset with myself. Why couldn't I tell?" He then proceeds to tell me George isn't George at all. He's a convicted pedophile and had moved down from the north of England to try and escape further grooming and kidnapping charges. He wasn't allowed Facebook as part of his sentence terms. He had vanished a few days after offering me a lift and police and came to my colleague's door asking questions. My colleague was so filled with guilt and shame, he didn't realize something was off. I'm sure 20 was too old for this guy, but I'm also a 5-foot small woman who is by no means big or strong. I think back to that day a lot, and what if I had accepted the lift, or if any of my friends had just been nice and ended up in a bad situation. Story 35. Years ago, I had just moved to a new city alone. About a week in, I was walking home from work at night, early morning, when a truck passed me very slowly. A few moments later, I realized he made the block and did it again. He did this a few times. I was closer to home by this point and decided I should just make a run for it. But something in me said to just keep walking, which seemed like an idiotic way to respond to a threat, but it worked out in the end because of it. I made it to a stop sign the last time he